So let's see. So the second article, which is a spin-off of this one, which actually came from me just reading another research study, and it just fits so nicely with this, talks about the motor system and its importance in developing communication. Because going back to this first article about the continuous flow, now, as an adult, I'm using my continuous flow to have a conversation verbally, okay? Let's be clear. We continue to use the earlier abilities and skills, but we scaffold on new skills. So they look different, but they're still the fundamental ability. My ability to have a conversation with an adult came from my ability to have a nonverbal proto-conversation as an infant, okay? That's how it develops. And we see a one-to-one direct causation with individuals, children who do not have the proto-conversations, and they never become conversational adults. It's one-to-one. So if you have it, if you can work on it, if you can strengthen it, you can then work towards. I can't promise every child who strengthens their proto-conversations or continuous flow will get to be a fully conversational adult, but I can promise you that if they don't, they won't. And so when we think about these patterns, okay, and I use the term pattern very generally, these are social patterns, right? A back and forth reciprocal exchange. We're looking, we're smiling, we're turning, we're nodding, we're reaching, we're grabbing. We're doing all of these expressive kind of motor communicative gestures, right? We're using our motor system to communicate. So you can see where this is going. Now, what this article said is that scientists, neurologists identified the neurons in the brain that are responsible for actually predicting what words we are going to be using before we speak. And it's actually necessary that our prefrontal cortex do this in order to anticipate how we're going to be communicating in that moment. So our brain is predicting what we're going to say before we say it. Well, let me use another word that's used a lot in child development. Our brain is planning what it's going to say before we say it. So when we think about what the executive functioning kind of part of our prefrontal cortex with its executive functioning and planning and sequencing, right? A lot of people talk about motor planning and sequencing. Well, yeah, when we're an infant, we're using our motor system to plan and sequence and work and explore the world. But as an adult, I'm using my executive functioning, planning, and sequencing to remember what my schedule today looks like, or to plan my schedule tomorrow, right? Or to figure out how am I going to get from point A to point B to point C to point D and get all my errands done. I'm constantly using my prefrontal cortex and planning with many different types of information. It just starts off as motor planning. So, but that's important. It starts off as a motor component. So how does it develop early in life? Well, it develops because we're stimulating our motor system. It's not by someone showing me how to complete a motor task. It's by me figuring out how to complete a motor task. Well, what are the most important types of motor tasks? Those that involve a social exchange. So now you can see the development of our prefrontal cortex, especially used to plan out and anticipate what the next steps are, doesn't just come from me dragging a chair to a shelf to get a toy. It comes from me figuring out how do I get mommy or daddy to come over to that shelf and get that toy for me by taking them by the hand, pushing them, shaking my finger, not the right toy, then going and getting the other parent who maybe is willing to get it for me. So all of those processes start in part in the prefrontal cortex with our executive functioning. So now we know that if we're going to be a good verbal communicator, again, we have to have that earlier communication pattern, which is that continuous flow. So who wants to share or comment on this? I know I just kind of summarized the whole thing. If the child can't plan for the most, he won't be able from the most complex. So planning is huge, right? That's why we need to be really careful about how a child learns some of the most basic things early in life. Because one of the things anybody who's worked with me or my team knows, and I think this is kind of what you're talking about too, is that unfortunately, if we are doing a lot of the planning for a child, right? In most therapy offices, even in OT offices, when an OT shows a child how to complete a task, hand over hand, or models for them, who's doing the planning? The adult is. We're showing the child what it looks like, and then they're replicating. So whose plan is it? Well, it's my plan, the adult, not the child's. So it's better if the child can take the plan and make it a new one, or maybe we even show them the wrong plan or a silly plan, and they get to figure out the right plan. And that would be more of a floor time moment. But in most therapy offices, because we're both focused on goals and outcomes, we're working towards teaching the child our plan, our way of doing it. In speech therapy, it's the same idea. We're telling the child what sounds to make. We're showing them what sounds to make. We're telling them the answer a lot of times. Now, that's not a bad way to achieve our goal. But the question is, what other areas are we then neglecting? Or actually, are we shutting down developmentally if we're not giving the child the opportunity to do the planning themselves? Well, the prefrontal cortex is one of the areas of the brain we're not using. So to answer your question, I mean, if the child can't plan, we need to give them more opportunities to plan. And unfortunately, if they're in more structured environments, whether it be school or therapy, where an adult is leading the intervention, then they are taking the back seat and someone else is doing the planning for them. So the prefrontal cortex won't be developing because they're just learning to memorize and repeat, as opposed to create and plan. OTs and PTs and SLPs call this praxis, right? You have an idea, you come with a plan, then you execute it. Unfortunately, most people just work on the final step, the execution. It's usually the adult's idea, the adult's plan. Or if the child even has an idea, the adult then gives them the plan. So be really careful about that, how often we do that. But if you do floor time correctly, or Greenspan floor time, which is the correct version of it, you're going to naturally be working on planning with the prefrontal cortex, because you're challenging the child to come with their own adaptive response each time. Let's see. I have it written into my wall to combine motor planning. Good work. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it seems. I mean, it seems obvious, but it's something people don't talk about because even OTs know this. The ones I've talked to, they're like, yeah, but that's how we have been told to achieve our goals, right? Modeling and hand over hand stuff and showing a child how to use proper tripod grasp, use these scissors this way. Well, listen, if I'm going to be using scissors, there's hopefully not a whole lot of different hand holds I have to use while using scissors. But still, that's an opportunity for a child to think and learn how to hold a scissor, right? And that each opportunity they have to figure something out is one more opportunity to strengthen those parts of the brain. Whereas each time we show them something, which something we have to do, and I get it, but we want to minimize those opportunities because those are moments we're taking away the opportunity. I found it interesting that ABA makes them not think, and so hindering them from generalizing themselves. Exactly. I mean, the irony is that, or less about the irony, it's just that, these interventions have been around for so long, and we as a community have been so focused on outcomes that if something like ABA was able to show a child can point for the first time or look at you, or pretend to look at you, if you will, it was growth. But the reality is everything we know from a neurological level about how the brain develops, how we learn, I mean, all of these things, none of those principles are being integrated into things like ABA or even the educational system, right? We know that our educational system is broken because they're not using updated research methods. And they're just trying to kind of add new things into an already broken system. Anyways, I could go off. I know from experience how important it is to figure things out for yourself. Exactly. I mean, when we learn, like I can still tell you, this is somewhat irrelevant, but relevant to my learning process, right? I was terrible at just following instructions and memorizing things. But when I got to figure things out, like doing research for, I still remember when I was 12 years old, I was given the opportunity to do research on the moon. And we were trying to figure out what a day on the moon was like. Okay, now a day on the moon actually takes around 27 to 29 Earth days. And the reason is because the moon is not just moving around the Earth to be exposed to the sun, but the moon is also rotating itself. So there's actually two different kind of endpoints where it's in front of the sun again or behind the Earth. But I know that. Why do I know that? Because I did research on it. I had to figure it out. So I still remember it. And there's a whole bunch of other random things I learned that way. I couldn't tell you anything else about that entire school year, right? But because I explored it myself, I got to figure it out. I planned out how to learn that stuff. And I found it interesting. I retained it. And I still have it today. Many, I'm not going to tell you how many years later, but many years later. But you're right. I mean, when we think about things, so this is where, in this concept, I mean, I'm glad we're talking about it. This concept of planning is synonymous with my father's definition of thinking, right? So he always says, floor time is an intervention that works on relating, communicating, and thinking, right? The three non-negotiable elements of calling something floor time. Well, a lot of people work on the relating and communicating piece. Not many people work on the thinking piece. And that's the reason why Greenspan floor time is different than other floor times. Even another floor time calls it cognition or cognitive, right? They're changing the term, but that's not what he ever meant by it. Because what we're talking about, when a child is doing the thinking, they're the planning, they're problem solving, they're creating, right? They're doing all of the things that go into using this prefrontal cortex and executive functioning, but they're generating their own adaptive response. And they're not necessarily using us as a model or a guide for any more than is necessary. So when you think about what it really means to be a thinker, right? It's, can we take that guess and try it? Can we do something and see how it works out? This is actually how artificial intelligence works. It makes a guess and it tests that guess, and then it learns from that test. And it does it over and over and over, a million times in a second. But that's what defines artificial intelligence, the ability to make an inference and test that inference and learn from it. Okay, so what is going to make us intelligent? Not memorizing and repeating, because we have had computers do that for years and they're not considered intelligent. But when we think about what makes us intelligent, it's also our ability to have an inference, to try something out, to come up with a solution, test it out. If that solution doesn't work, we try another one, right? And if we do that in a more general sense, we constantly are learning and interacting with the world around us. So how do you recommend supporting a child's ideation when they have new ideas? Well, and Kate, this is a really great question. It gets back to the use of that motor system, right? And engaging that ability to engage in praxis, right? So whether it be them figuring out a new place in a room to run to, or whether it be figuring out a new storyline or a complex, epic journey they're going on, whatever it might be, the key is that the child is figuring out what to do next. Now, here's what I always tell parents, and this is where, again, my father's version of Greenspan floor time is a little different than the other version of floor time, because they're not a lot different. We are allowed to what I call water the levee, right? We are allowed to expand. We're allowed to do something new and different ourselves, as long as our intent is not to get the child to memorize and respond in a rigid way. We're not trying to teach them to do what we're doing. We're trying to show them that, hey, guess what? If we're sitting down here, I'm going to run up there. And all we say is, well, fine. You got your car here. I'm going to drive my car up the ladder, up the slide. That's fine to do. You're not telling your child to drive the car up the slide. Maybe they say no, and you stop driving up the slide. Maybe they watch you, interestingly, because they never realized the cars could go up there. And now they know the car could go up there. They want to go up there too, but they don't want to do it your way. They want to go up the ladder, or they want to sit up there, or they want to throw the car off the edge. Any of that is fine as long as they're not throwing the car at someone, right? So, but the idea is you did something different, you expanded a little bit, and that's okay as long as you're not doing it by taking control. You're not doing it to direct, you're not doing it to suggest, you're not doing it to model. You're doing it just to have fun and expand the interaction, because by definition, many of these kids cannot expand. And I think that's what you're kind of talking about, Kate, is that when a child doesn't know what to do next, which by definition, where many children are developmentally, they don't always know what to do next. We can do something next as long as we're not doing it to direct them. And it seems subtle, but actually it's a very important difference. If the child knows you're trying to teach them something, it's a very different energy in the exchange. Also, when you just do it in the first person narrative and you say, okay, here we go, I'm driving up the slide, here goes my car, I'm driving up, and you talk in the first person, the child doesn't have to agree with you. You're not telling them to watch you. You're not telling them to do it with you. You're not saying, let's go up the slide. You're saying, I'm going up the slide. And they have the choice to agree or disagree. Now, if they look away and do their own thing, you've missed the boat, right? They really didn't want you to do that. But if they're interested in what you're doing because you're playing off of what they were doing, rolling the car, now they're going to be fascinated. Wow, I didn't realize the cars go up there. And now, not only do the cars go up on the slide, they go everywhere. They go in the swing, they go in the trampoline, they go in the cave, they go in the yoga ball, right? And all of a sudden, you doing something different and new, not to teach or educate or direct, all of a sudden opens up a world of new possibilities that the child had never even realized were there. You just certainly, it's like you peeled away, a layer so they could see what was behind it, right? You're not actually telling them to do it a certain way. You're giving them new opportunities. Let's see. I find my child is so intelligent to figure so many things out by himself. He actually they figure out. in order to be able to get butt naked or go into a room without us being able to stop him. But he's still stuck most times in social situations. I know this is too vague, but I really wonder what is missing in those when he just seems completely checked out. So he may know you all, right? He may know you all very well. That's true for most kids, right? They know their caregivers. They know where your buttons are. They know what you're gonna do before you do it. Especially smart kids who have a limited social experience too, because their only understanding is you. Um, the key is helping them gradually learn about other people too. Sometimes we go from like being in a 1 or 2 person setting with our caregivers into a 10, 20, 30 child room or birthday party or jamboree or social group, whatever it is. It's unfortunately too big. So the key is number one, start with one-on-one play dates that are facilitated. So one other child, maybe 2 other kids, so they can learn the subtlety of what peers do. But also what I recommend before you even do that is make sure that even though he's smart, you want to see how smart he is with you. It's not about how he gets around you. I want to see how he gets through you, right? I want to see how he negotiates with you, right? It's not about him figuring out how to get away with something. That's smart, but he's avoiding social exchanges by doing it, right? Instead, I want to see how he negotiates with you, how he compromises, how he interacts with you around the same desire. And if he can't do that, that means he can't stay with the social engagement during these moments. We have to create that co-regulated exchange even during these times. Does that kind of make sense? Good. I know a child who has ideas but has difficulty multi-planning and tells the adult to execute. Okay, great question, Andrew. So we've worked with a lot of kids like that, and we've done this with multiple types of children. We've actually worked with kids with severe physical impairments, right? Tim once, which is the other director of the Floortime Center, he once worked with a girl who was completely immobile. I mean, she was draped over her wheelchair tray all the time, and we actually got her to lay on top of a big yoga ball, and we used that to beat and bounce and give her some stimulation. And all of a sudden, for the first time ever, she was lifting her head up and turning from side to side to see where the beating was coming from. Right? So the most basic things that we can get a child to do, she figured out. How do I lift my head up, and where's the sound coming from my leg? Okay, she had to figure out how to lift her head. She had to figure out how to coordinate the muscles in her neck and turn her head. Right? That is the beginning. A few basic baby steps, and we keep going from there. Now she had severe cerebral palsy and had real kind of neuromuscular limitations, but she still was able to move more than we knew. And this was at like age 18 we started working with. Okay, this little girl who's been literally hunched over, draped over a tray most of her life. And at 18, all of a sudden, she lifted her head up for the first time simply because we put her on a therapy ball, we gave her a little sensory input, and we made it into a fun game without trying to teach her anything. And she chose to do things that she had never done before. And their therapist, everybody was amazed, but it wasn't amazing. It's amazing in one sense, but in reality, it's really basic stuff intervention-wise. The sad thing is, it was just never provided to her, made available to her. But if a child doesn't have those significant physical challenges, and we need them to do it, the goal is not to try to get them to do it, but the goal is to try to get them to do a little bit here and there. So if they're directing you, you play dumb. I can't tell you how many kids I basically think I'm the dumbest guy in the world because they think I can't do anything, and I've told them 100 times, well, I don't get it. I don't know how to do that. So just play dumb. They give you a direction. Okay, you now again, you don't say I don't know how to do it. You pretend you don't know how to do it. You have to actively be doing it wrong, and maybe they get in, they show you. Or I'll give you an example. I had a boy. He was in 6th grade, and he had some significant avoidance of kind of doing these motor activities. And I think he had some severe motor planning sequencing issues. And he couldn't even tell me what to do in this giant playroom. And I was like, okay, well, there's got to be something in here. And he saw a boxing bag. And he said, okay, box. I said, great. Okay, I'm going to go box. And I went up to the boxing bag and said, wait a second. Never boxed before. How do I box? And he just used box. And I hit it with my head. and he says, is that it? He said, no. And he said, you put your hands up. Oh, and he put his hands up when he was telling me that. I said, oh, okay, my hands are up. Now what? He said, box. Well, how do I box? and eventually he was actually teaching me how to box step by step by step by step, because I was challenging him to express himself in more definitive ways that had more steps to it. So he was clearly describing what to do. But also, while he was doing that, he was getting up and he was modeling some of it from across the room, even though it was the first time we had met and he didn't want to do anything. So that's, I mean, it's tricky, but remember, we just got to keep our eye on the prize. The goal isn't to get him to move. The goal is to get him to a co-rate interaction. And I got into one about boxing with him by playing dumb and, getting him to come up with that. All right, everybody. I was just thinking about parkour. It seemed, 100%. Parkour was a very good activity for more complex planning and sequencing. I think that might be the ultimate test of one's ability to plan and sequence. we could have a parkour course in our offices. I don't know. We'll see. But I want to take a break here, everybody. This has been awesome. Good questions, good comments. Thanks again, everybody. Just so you know, I will be posting these two separately as lectures based on each of the articles that we talked about. And again, I hope to see you all here in a couple weeks. Take care, everybody. Thank you. Have a good night or day. Bye.